Welcome to Light Over Heat with Professor David Yamani. Today I'm happy to bring you a brief conversation I had with Noah Schwartz, the author of On Target, a book about the NRA's political activities from a very unique perspective. I'm really excited to pioneer this series of conversations with authors of significant books. I'm happy to begin with Noah Schwartz, who's written this book, On Target, Gun Culture, Storytelling in the NRA. I've been a big fan of this work since before the book was published. In fact, I liked it so much, they asked me to do a blurb for the back. So by way of introduction to my conversation with Noah, let me read what I said on the back cover of the book. I say, "Leave it to a Canadian to understand gun culture in the United States better than most American scholars do. On Target is an excellent treatment of the National Rifle Association's role in the ongoing great gun debate in the U.S. Schwartz offers a level-headed, participant observer's view of what the NRA actually does that animates its political power. He is a skilled ethnographer and writer, and his thick descriptions of the NRA annual meeting, gun classes, range visits, and the NRA museum are among the best I have read. Very highly recommended." Please enjoy this conversation I had with Noah, and if you have any follow-up questions, I'm sure he would be happy to answer them. Also, let me know what you think of this idea of interviewing book authors as part of this Light Over Heat series. I hope that it fits that promise of this channel.
Well, I'm really excited to be talking with Noah Schwartz. He teaches political science at the University of Fraser Valley in British Columbia, author of a book called On Target about gun culture and the NRA. I've already said, this is, I think, a great contribution, but I wonder, Noah, first of all, welcome, and also, tell me a little bit about how you see the main contribution of this book.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, first of all. I think there are two main contributions for the book for a non-academic audience. I think the first is really busting myths. There's a lot of myths out there, both on the left and on the right, about what the NRA is, what it does. And I think those myths really give an impression of the organization as maybe more powerful than it actually is. And I think it distorts our view of the gun debate. I think there's a lot of people out there that think if, they could just make the NRA go away, that the gun debate would be solved and we'd all live happily ever after. That's not actually the case. So part of it was sort of busting that myth of invincibility out there about the organization and showing what it actually looks like from the inside. Yeah. The second thing was really trying to delve into the gun culture in a way that we don't often see it presented in the media. Obviously, there's people like you, David, who do a really good job of engaging honestly. But as we know, and as you've talked about with your discussions of the standard model and things like that, a lot of people out there who engage with the gun culture do so maybe in bad faith or from a certain perspective, especially in the media. I didn't want this to be just another kind of media of expose where you have a very, urban, cosmopolitan reporter going in to try to document the depravity of these gun owners. I really wanted it to be an honest engagement with the gun culture, with American gun culture, from someone who is both an insider in a sense and also an outsider in that, on the one hand, I'm a dual citizen. I'm a US Canadian citizen, but I've lived most of my life in Canada. So I have a different perspective than a lot of people might on the debate.
Yeah. Well, that, kind of brings me to this next question, which has to do with pre-scientific intuitions. And, I'm a big believer that, where nobody goes into a study as a blank slate, even though, methodologically we want to bracket our assumptions in order to see reality. But so what sort of pre-scientific intuition did you have going into the study?
Yeah, so I mean, when I started this work, I was a grad student, and I think, the danger in grad school is that you have enough knowledge to think that you know everything, but not enough knowledge to know how little you actually know. So going into this, I had a lot of self-aggrandizing images of coming in and solving the gun debate, which, as we know, you look more into it and you realize that this isn't the gun debate isn't a mathematical equation that we're going to find a solution to. It's about competing values. It's about competing interests. It's about competing ways of life and competing cultures and how we reconcile those in under one sort of political roof. So I think going into it, I mean, my views were very much shaped by where I come from. So as I mentioned, I'm a dual American Canadian citizen. My mom's from New York City, you know, the gun control capital of the US. My dad's from Montreal, which is really probably the locus of the most gun control advocacy in Canada, thanks to a mass shooting in 1989. So I came at this from a very cosmopolitan, urban, was never raised around guns. My story is a little bit like yours, actually, in that my first real authentic exposure to gun culture was through someone that I was dating at the time. And she was from Alberta, which is kind of the Texas of Canada. So she was from a rural area and grew up around guns. And when we would go out and visit her family, I tried shooting for the first time. And once again, that direct exposure to gun culture busted some of those myths in my head. So I think I went into this from a very explicitly anti-gun perspective. And as I did research, I started to realize that the framework through which I'd understand the debate didn't fit the facts that I was looking at. My misconceptions, my stereotypes about the gun culture slowly kind of melted away. And I think it allowed me to engage a lot more authentically in the book with gun culture and really delve into, what motivates people to want to own guns, why are the guns an important part of the social fabric of people's lives? Why are they the center of people's social circle and their serious leisure, right? So I think in the end, I hope that I'm able to take the reader on a similar journey to the one that I went on in the book, and maybe bring those two solitudes a little closer together.
Yeah. Well, that is eerily similar to my own experience, and my now wife, was a similar kind of thing. Grew up in the rural area, guns were normal for her, and so it's funny how similar we are, and probably why your book resonates so much with me, because it's that having one foot in the culture and one foot outside the culture really gives a kind of unique perspective. So we see what you kind of found in your journey, but is there some way or ways in which your mind changed as you kind of went into the study? Some things that you were expecting that turned out not to be that way, or things that you weren't expecting to see that you saw?
Yeah, I think really what I wasn't expecting to see, I think the standard model of that we approach gun control or the gun debate from and the gun culture from when you're outside of it really sees guns as kind of antisocial objects. And I think the biggest thing that surprised me was the way in which guns actually, the way in which a community is built around these objects. So one of the things that I did in the book was I went and I took NRA firearm safety classes. That was actually another thing that surprised me. When I started this project, I had no idea, the history of the NRA, how far back it goes, and that a lot of what they do actually day to day is teaching these firearm safety classes. So taking the classes, what really surprised me was, first of all, how the experience and the social practice of going to the gun range is really one that I think brings people together in a way that I didn't expect. We would, start off these classes. Everybody's there is a stranger unless you came with someone else. And, it's just like the beginning, the first day of a university class where everybody's sitting in their seats and nobody wants to talk. And we're all really shy. And then by the end of the day, we're high-fiving and everyone's on a first name basis. And there was a real sense of camaraderie that came with it. And I think that speaks to, like any kind of sport or leisure activity, the way that community is created around these things. And I think that's interesting. It's something that transcends, like, there's a lot of differences between Canada and the United States in terms of the gun cultures that we have, just because of the way that legislation in Canada has shaped gun culture. Gun culture in Canada hasn't been able to become gun culture 2.0 because of the legislation that we have. However, that aspect of leisure really transcends the border. And as I've continued my research here in Canada, I've seen those same leisure communities, and I've been able to speak to those same leisure communities and give them a voice in some of my future work.
Yeah. I'm going to go off script here because what you just said reminds me of something I've been thinking about recently, which is, kind of understanding the NRA is, we would call in sociology of religion, a dual structure. So, on the one hand, there's the political arm that gets most of the attention, this 800-pound gorilla that, I think we could disagree with that characterization. But, the political wing, but then there's also this educational wing that would involve a lot of what you're looking at in terms of firearms classes, the museum, and those sorts of things. Now, from a certain perspective, that also is a political wing, right? They'll talk about the soft power of the NRA as, through its this more educational missions. I, would see that not necessarily as the most obvious way to look at that, but how would you address, that question of, is everything the NRA does, in service of its political mission and its legislative agenda? Or, in these firearms classes or the museums, are we seeing something different?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think, it's complicated. On the one hand, they are creating culture, right? They're providing service to a group of people. And these classes certainly provide a service to the community. They provide firearms education. I think no matter what your position on gun control is, you can probably support the idea of people being taught safe gun handling. At the same time, they provide the infrastructure for an advocacy group to be successful. When you're an advocacy group, right, as I'm sure you know, the biggest challenge is how do we overcome those collective action problems? How do we overcome the free rider syndrome? How do we get people to participate, to donate money, things like that? I think the pro-gun side has a built-in advantage because they are already a community. They're a sort of a pre-political community that then becomes politicized. I think it's John Hauptman from the Guns Guide to Liberal podcast. He says you can't take someone to the anti-gun range, which I think is, pretty funny, but also very true. But that infrastructure that the class creates, really, because they provide a service to the community, they're able to draw on this community for political support. And I think that's really the source of their strength, and what allows them to carry out those political activities, the stuff that captures the media attention, the lobbying and things like that, because they have this built-in structure.
Oh. And I think I see some overlaps there with Matthew Lacomb's work on the NRA, which may have come out around the same time as your book, so you probably weren't able to take his argument fully into account. But this idea that the real strength of the NRA isn't in campaign contributions or buying off legislators, but really in mobilizing people who are invested in social gun culture, and that then becomes a political identity.
Exactly. Yeah.
So what I'm all about light over heat. This is the light over heat channel. Do you feel like the work that you have done here in this book, it contributes kind of to light over heat in this controversial area where in the United States, and I think also in Canada, is quite divisive? Or do you think that's just a problematic way to think about guns, and that some heat is good?
Oh, I think I definitely, and what gravitates me a lot towards your work as well is that aspect of light over heat. I think the book normatively, the book is agnostic on questions of gun control. First of all, because that's not what we're talking about. We're not looking at statistical evidence on the efficacy of certain policies, but also because I think fundamentally, like, Americans don't want to hear a person living in Canada's views on gun control. Fundamentally, one of the ironies of American politics is that everyone in the world has an opinion on American politics, but I don't think Americans want to be told what to do by the rest of the world, and I empathize with that. So I thought I don't want to get into these policy discussions. My normative contribution for the book was really that aspect of trying to make two different cultures intelligible to one another. And I thought about it before. I'm like, okay, what's the audience for my book? Well, it's an academic manuscript, right? There's career incentives here as well that are motivating me to write this. So if I'm writing for an academic audience, that means trying to make the gun culture accessible to that audience, and trying to explain it in terms that academics or people who read books written by academics are going to understand and maybe be able to empathize with. So I think that, the normative perspective of the book is really building empathy. And even at the end of the day, if I'm not trying to change people's opinions on policy, but I am trying to force you to empathize with people who may be different with you. And that's really the normative goal of the book.
Yeah, well, I'm such a big proponent of empathy. It's a big part of what is in the conclusion to my forthcoming book on Gun Curious, that some of the lessons that I've learned along the way, the importance of empathy as a vehicle for, helping us navigate through this issue. So I definitely appreciate that. One thing is I get a lot of contact or calls, emails, I guess, really from graduate students who are thinking about studying guns in some way, typically, from a non kind of public health, epidemiology, criminology perspective. But really, for any person who is a graduate student who's thinking about entering the field of gun studies, what sort of advice do you have?
Yeah, I think the first thing is you can't skip out on the experiential learning. I think the gun debate is so technical that if you don't have that aspect of firsthand experience with it, it's going to become very apparent very quickly in your writing, and an entire one half of the debate is going to completely ignore you, right? If you go into it and you start writing about 100 round clipazines with fully semi-automatic, right? If you don't know the lingo, people aren't going to take you seriously. So you really have to get your hands dirty and do that experiential component of it. For example, so I was really lucky, and my university let me teach a class on guns and politics, and I was a little bit inspired by your sociology of guns class. So I let my students do it's an upper year course, so I let my students do an ethnographic assignment where they could take in Canada, to get a gun license, you have to pass a firearm safety course that's written and administered by our national police force, the RCMP. So that the Mounties and the red shirts and the hats, right? So they administer the course. So my students had the option of taking that course and writing an ethnographic reflection on it. But once again, a lot of them really appreciated, even those of who have explicitly told me like they hate guns, they're afraid of guns, they never want to touch them, is that they were able to really learn the firsthand experience with the legislation, but then also how they actually work. So I think the first thing really, get your hands dirty, but then also I think really try to approach it with an open mind, and to think critically about the scholarship that's produced and about disciplinary norms that might shape the scholarship that's produced. In Abigail Cohn's book about guns, which is a little bit older now, from Oxford University Press, I think she has a really good reflection in her at the end of the book about disciplinary norms in the field of public health that might shape the output of certain research. So I think really being able to put on our critical thinking caps as well about, okay, what is the context that this research is being produced in, and what are the norms that are left unspoken in the methodology of that they're working with.
Yeah. Yeah, really, I think an underappreciated book, because it's kind of a square peg, Abigail Cohn's book, but I revisit it every couple of years, and I always, because I'm in a different mental space when I do, I always get something new out of it, and so it's a good book to mention here for people who are interested in studying gun culture at that particular time, with focus on certain type of shooting sport, but much beyond that as well. So um, uh, as we sort of start to wrap up here, what are your parting thoughts? Things that you think are important that my few questions didn't get at, or anything you want to get off of your chest, or off of your mind.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, buy the book. No.
Absolutely.
Yes, available on Amazon. But no, second of all, I think I guess I want to say I really appreciate the work that you're doing in this series. I think promoting, having discussions that can be intellectually rigorous and serious, but also available to a public audience, is so important. And I think to your audience, I would say, really, keep being curious, and let that curiosity drive you to really explore this debate in more detail. Because I guarantee, no matter what you thought coming into it, there's a lot more to learn, a lot more to discover. And I've been studying this. I've only been studying this for 6 years, but I still learn something new every day. So
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. Yes, there definitely will be a link to the book in the show notes for this video. It is, an academic studies published by University Press, but one of the things I really appreciated in reading it in manuscript was the storytelling was excellent. You really feel like you're being brought into this world. Again, if it's a world that you're familiar with in gun training classes, NRA TV, the museum, it'll ring true to you. If you're not at all familiar with that world, this is a great way to be introduced to that. So again, links to buy the book in the show notes also will be on my blog. And if you have questions or comments for Professor Schwartz, leave them in the comments. I'm sure that he'll circle back, or I'll remind him to circle back and look at those, either to answer in his own work, or just to think about as he carries his work forward. It's great to see you sort of face to face. I appreciate the time, and I'll look forward to another opportunity to chat with you.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me on.